Okay, well, welcome everybody. This topic that we're covering today, emotional self-care for us vegans and those moving towards veganism through the holidays is near and dear to me because, I've certainly struggled myself with this. And I will not pretend that I know all the answers because I myself, still have challenges sometimes. But I do think there's things that we can do that can make it a better holiday for us. And so today we're going to explore some different things that we can do as vegans to have a better holiday experience. And so I want to invite you to think about, maybe you can relate to some of these kind of challenges. For example, when you are at holiday dinners with other people who are not vegan and there's all these animal-based foods and just the emotions that you have that come with that. Or, maybe you're the only vegan in your family or your social circle. And so, you might have vegan friends online, but maybe in your community, there aren't a lot of other vegans. Um, or you might have people in your life that are critical or judgmental and you feel triggered or attacked when others are not supportive or even are critical or, make negative comments. And you might find too that people react defensively or they just don't even want to listen, to why you're vegan or what your needs are as a vegan through these times like the holidays. So you might have your own challenges that might be different, but I invite you to think about what social situations are most challenging for you during the holidays. And as things come up for you, I'm going to be asking you to reflect on different things during this presentation. And so I invite you, like, you might even want to write down your thoughts on some of these questions that I'll be asking through the presentation. And, certainly if things really resonate for you, you can also share in the chat, although a lot of that I won't be able to address until the end of the presentation, and we'll have some time for Q&A and discussion at the very end. So if there's specific things that come up for you, there'll be time when I finish the presentation part of it with the slides that we can talk in more depth about some of this. But just think for a moment, what is most challenging for you during the holidays, especially since becoming vegan? And what do you anticipate as the holidays approach that maybe has been hard in the past or you think could be difficult, whether it be different family situations that you'll face or social situations? So just be reflecting on that as we're talking about different strategies during this time together. So a bit about what I want to cover today. One aspect of it is how we can be intentional and proactive in how we create a more positive holiday experience. So, sometimes it just feels like the holidays just happen to us and we're just sort of reacting. But there are things we can do to actually set an intention and take some action to have a holiday experience that is better for us. We can also learn and incorporate different tools for handling difficult emotions and anxiety and stress that might come up. And we can also get better at setting healthy boundaries and realizing the importance of self-care and not feeling guilty about this. So we're going to touch on each of those in more depth shortly. But before I dive in, a little bit about my background. I've been a psychologist for over 25 years, and for most of that time, until not too long ago, I was a psychotherapist who worked full-time with people dealing with things like anxiety, trauma, grief, stress, health issues. Um, wasn't specifically with vegan issues, just the issues of life that people deal with. But I had my own journey of becoming first vegetarian and then vegan, and basically because I learned about factory farming. I really hadn't understood it before, and something I saw, a program I saw, just woke me up to it. And I began reading everything I could and learning everything I could. And so for ethical reasons, because I just did not want to eat anything, any animal products, first I stopped eating meat. And then over time, as I really learned more and just wanted to more fully embrace my values, I became fully vegan in early 2019. And I wish it happened quicker. But I can say that for me, one of the challenges was the social issues that, navigating social situations that are so often dominated by foods that have dairy products and, is often hidden in, baked goods and things like that. It took me a while to really connect emotionally with what happened to the dairy cows and egg laying hens, the way I had with the meat industry. And it just took a while. But when I did, I committed. And I've also discovered, health benefits and the environmental impact of our food choices too, that also play a role for me. And because I was just so passionate that this way of living can affect so many things that we care about, from animal compassion to the earth to our health. It led me to go on to get different certifications in these different areas, and to really transition my career more into speaking, teaching, and writing about how we can thrive with a plant-powered vegan lifestyle, and particularly the emotional and social aspects of how do we thrive. Because sometimes those are overlooked. There's a lot on the nutrition, but a little less on like, well, how do we handle being different than many of the people around us? I did write a book too that's coming out next year called The Vegan Transformation, A Journey to Heal Yourself and the World. So as I get into the different topics that we're going to cover today, you know, some of the themes that underlie the topics that I'll be getting into are these mindset shifts where we're moving away from things that are not under our control to actually focusing on what actually is in our power. We don't have control over other people and their choices, but we have control over our own thoughts, our own reactions, our own choices and behaviors. So we're really trying to focus where we do have power. And we're also being intentional. We're looking at what do we want to create here? What's our vision? If we really had a choice, what would the vision be that we would have for an ideal holiday? And setting an intention that for what we want to create, and really acting in alignment with that intention, being proactive, creative, recognizing our own triggers, and implementing healthy self-care. Because sometimes as vegans, we can be compassionate for everyone else, or at least for the animals, and forget to include our own self, that we too are sentient beings. And I think the last mindset shift that we'll be tapping into as we cover these different ways of navigating the holidays is seeing ourselves as leaders. You know, in my book research, one thing that came up was that it was perhaps 3% of the global population that's vegan, and maybe only 5 to 7% vegetarian. It wasn't, a high number. And so we are leaders in a movement for compassion, for animal justice and well-being, and also for human health and the planet. And so in being a leader, we may sometimes have to learn to do things a little differently, and, be that forerunner in our social circles for a healthy and compassionate way of living. So just holding these mindsets in mind as we dive into the different topics in more depth that we're going to cover today. So the first kind of shift that we mentioned earlier that we'll be covering today is being intentional and proactive. So how do we do that? And so I want to invite you, I'm going to ask these questions for you to reflect on, and there will be a recording of this session. So if I'm going too quickly, for you to be able to really think these through deeply right now, just kind of come back to this later, because it's helpful to spend some time thinking about how would you like your holidays to actually be. And I first learned about this practice when I lost both of my parents at a younger age than I would have liked. I was an adult, but both of my parents died younger than I would have liked. And it really changed how my holidays were. Before that, my holidays had been centered around time with my family of origin. And when they passed, both actually from lifestyle related medical conditions, the holidays were really different. And, for many years, I really grieved, and I had to learn to take charge of my holidays and maybe make some changes in how I spent them and how I focused. And I found that also true when I became vegan, that maybe, and vegetarian too before that, holidays might have been centered around certain foods and certain traditions and certain activities that suddenly did not feel so okay to me. And it was suddenly harder to be around people that might be eating in a way that I didn't feel right eating anymore, or when they just maybe didn't seem to get it at all, why it mattered to me. So that's when I think between my own losses earlier in life and then, becoming vegan, I realized that I needed to be proactive and starting to think about what I wanted for my holidays. And so I want to invite you to think about that for yourself. If you could just be the one that had the say for how your holidays went. And I realize in reality, we don't always have control over everything, but just take a moment to envision how you'd like your holidays to be ideally. And whether they turn out to be exactly like that or not, they may or may not, but just give yourself some time to let yourself dream a little bit. You know, who would you spend the time with during different parts of the holiday? What kinds of things would you focus on? What foods would you eat and share with others? What activities would you ideally engage in? What ones would you no longer engage in? And what are the values you want to live by and the mindsets you want to cultivate? Sometimes our cultures become very consumerist around the holidays. Maybe you're wanting to step away from that and to engage in things that value other things that matter to you more now. So take a moment to reflect on those and, come back to these questions later as well, when you have more time. And now, as you've envisioned, okay, what your ideal holiday might look like, what you want to have your holiday look like, let's bring it down to more tangible, thoughts about how to create this. And again, we're holding this as a vision, an ideal vision that may or may not fully unfold, or at least not right away. However, there are things we can do that can move in that direction. So you might reflect, are there certain events and traditions that I'm part of with my family or loved ones that I want to continue? Even if some of it might involve things I'm not totally comfortable with, it's important to be with my family and I want to be part of this. I just might need to do it a little differently, like bring my own food or whatever. So think about the traditions you really want to continue. And then there might be some that you just really choose not to be part of, that just you find that where you're at in your life now, they're not going to be good for you. Maybe you're choosing not to attend certain things. Maybe in their place, you're creating some new traditions, inviting your loved ones to join you in something new. For the events you do attend, what vegan foods will you prepare or purchase and bring to share with others so that they can see how awesome plant-based food can be? And then how will you communicate with your non-vegan friends and family about the changes that you might want to make? And we're going to get much more into the communication further into this, into the third section of this presentation, but just you're starting to think about like, well, how do I start to communicate what I want to people? And what's the mindset and the body language that I'm going to bring in how I approach these conversations? And, as I think of different people I've known as vegans and how they've navigated this, sometime, and I'll give an example at the very end of the talk of someone I interviewed for my book and how she kind of worked through these kinds of questions in her own life and what solutions she came to. But we're all individual. Some of us might want to still attend all the usual events, but just bring great vegan food and have that be our advocacy, to show how delicious and wonderful plant-based food can be. And I know other people might decide like certain events, they just really can't emotionally tolerate being around certain foods or certain conversations. And so they might bow out of those events. But then maybe if it's a loved one they really want to see, maybe they get together with the loved ones in a different way. for a vegan dessert afterwards or an activity that doesn't involve food. So you're thinking about how can I approach these things in a new way? And it's okay if you don't know the answers right now, just be creative. So regardless of what you do for the holidays, if you're human, you're probably going to have still some anxiety, stress, or tension or frustration that comes up at some point. Holidays are already, for many people, a stressful time, even without being vegan, because there's so much baggage attached to it. There's family expectations and old history and cultural messages and expectations. So it's certainly not abnormal to feel some stress during the holidays. Many of us do, especially if we're trying to fit into everybody else's expectations. So think about, and again, you might want to journal about this now or later. What are the holiday situations that you think are likely to bring up stress for you? And how can you prepare for those situations? Thinking of some of the questions we already asked, what might be things you do or some boundaries you might set that help you handle them better. And also, if there's unexpected stressors, what's your self-care plan for those? If you need, for example, to step away from a conversation or something really gets to you, how can you have a plan to kind of calm your nervous system and take care of yourself? So, and we're going to get a lot into self-care in just a moment, some of the tools for self-care, but just be thinking about that, just having a thought ahead of time that you're going to implement self-care can make a big difference, to be proactive instead of just reactive. Now, before we get into some of the techniques for calming stress and for coping with emotions, I just want to name a few things that can help us to be more compassionate to ourselves when we're having tough emotions. Having been a psychotherapist for many years, I walked with people through difficult emotional experiences, and I myself have had my share. And I think we as humans can be hard on ourselves sometimes when we have difficult or painful emotions, whether we're sad or angry or afraid or worried. We tend to think that we shouldn't be feeling that way and kind of want to press it down or not feel it. But emotions are wired into us as human beings. They're part of our navigational system. They help guide us to what we need. And they're an essential part of actually how we survive and thrive because they give us information. So learning different tools for both naming and kind of working through our emotions can be so key to being able to thrive through life in general. And as vegans, we need that too, because we're facing what Claire Mann, who wrote the book Dystopia, calls the burden of knowing. We're facing some of the tough things that are happening to animals and elsewhere that maybe other people aren't necessarily dealing with. So learning to handle our own feelings and work through them is really important. Buried feelings tend to come out somewhere. It's just often not directly. So, so first, just normalize that it's okay to have your feelings, whatever they are, even if they're uncomfortable. And if you're having a tough moment, just, when you can take a time out, step aside, when you can, and just take a moment with yourself and just name internally, what are you feeling? If it's multiple feelings, like I'm sad, I'm hurt, I'm angry, just name those feelings to yourself. If you have trouble naming your feelings, there are some great tools online, like the feeling wheel. Just you can Google the feeling wheel, and it has like a circle with all kinds of feelings all around it that help you to identify your feelings. So there's tools like that. And then just acknowledge, along with your feelings, there's going to be needs and desires that come with that. You may not be able to always act on them, but just naming them, like, I feel like crying right now, or I feel like yelling at someone right now. Just, you may or may not actually choose to do that in the moment, but by acknowledging it, it lets you see that there are some valid needs and impulses underneath the feelings. And, rather than acting in the moment, it's good to have tools to calm your emotions so that they can kind of be released. And then you can kind of have a clearer mind. And some other questions to think about is, what's underneath the feeling. Sometimes if we're really triggered by something, it's sometimes not only what's happening in the moment, but there could be some old wounds and old beliefs that are coming up that are making the situation feel even worse. And being mindful of your self-talk, learning to give yourself more empowering messages, which does not mean, again, negating your emotions, but rather just a more supportive, like you would be with a friend, like, it's okay to feel that. And I trust in you to be able to work through this and find a good solution. So, but it's okay to feel this right now. So you're just being supportive and empowering to yourself. So some questions you can ask yourself in the moment, when you're having tough feelings is, this is a little bit of a repeat of what I was just sharing, but some questions you can save to yourself for self-care. What am I feeling? What do I need? And maybe even write it out. If you're in a difficult conversation that's really stressing you out, do I have the energy or bandwidth to continue this right now? Can I take a moment to pause and return to this later, depending on what it is? Or what would nourish me right now? Or if I can't act on it right now, what might I need to do later for self-care? So these are just some things. And again, I think just the very act of asking these questions internally, it gives a calming effect to your nervous system, helping you to come out of fight or flight and back into your more wise, mindful brain. Now, there's a lot of different ways we can process and calm and release our emotions, and these are just some of them. Um, you may have your own tools that you use, and so there's no shortage of different ways that we can work through our feelings, through things like being in nature and being with our companion animals, or going to a sanctuary, taking a walk or a run. Writing can be incredibly helpful. The three bottom techniques, the loving kindness meditation, emotional freedom technique, and heart math, those are ones that are beyond the scope of what I can cover in today's talk, but I mention them because you might want to Google them to learn how you can incorporate them, because there are definitely videos out there on each of them where you could learn how they might each help you. The loving kindness meditation is about sending loving kindness first to yourself and then to others around you and then to all beings. And they find that it's very calming for the nervous system to go through this meditation. And I know there's many versions of it online. The emotional freedom technique involves tapping on acupressure points on your body and saying certain phrases that help to validate the feelings you're having while also adding to a sense of empowerment and calm. And heart math is a way of bringing your heart rhythm in synchrony with your breathing. And it, again, has a very calming influence on the nervous system and brings you back into your wise brain. So those are kind of more in-depth techniques, but there's also just simple things like breathing that you can do in everyday life. And I'll do one exercise right now that you can do alongside me. That's something you can do anytime. And I will say too that it's really good to have a toolkit of some of these types of ways of coping with emotions that you do every day, because if you just wait till you're stressed to try to do some of these, it's too overwhelming. But if you're doing, meditation daily, or you're doing exercise and time in nature daily, or any of these, it's going to be a lot easier to also apply it in those moments when you need it. So keep that in mind. But 4-7-8 breathing, I'm going to just do a brief practice of that right here, just to have that experiential time with that. Dr. Andrew Weil was the first person I had seen teaching the 4-7-8 breathing. And it's basically where you breathe in for 4 counts, you pause and hold the breath for 7, and then breathe out slowly through your mouth for 8 counts. And you do that just for about 4 breaths. And you might do it twice a day, like in the morning and at night or something. You could also do it when you need it, but it's not something you're going to do for a long period, because it's just a reset for the nervous system. So I invite you to try it right now, just for maybe 2 breaths. Just breathing in through your nose for the count of 4. pausing and holding that then for the count of 7. And then breathing out slowly through your mouth for the count of 8. And then just try that one more time and just see what you notice. You may find that breathing out slowly through your mouth for a few breaths like that, it seems to activate the parasympathetic nervous system, that more calming branch of our nervous system. So doing that a few times here and there, doing it in the morning and at night, and then maybe if you really need it in the moment, it can be one tool of many. There's so many out there. I'll also mention the grounding technique, the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. There's a lot of different variations of that, but it's a grounding technique to bring you in the moment if you're feeling upset about something, or you're having, kind of some traumatic or stressful thoughts in your brain and you want to come back into the moment. It's basically bringing yourself fully into the moment by noticing 5 things you see around you in your immediate environment, 4 things that you feel or can touch, like, I'm right now touching a piece of paper on my desk. I can feel my ring on my finger. When I'm, wearing glasses, I can feel them on my nose, so just noticing 4 things that you feel, 3 things you hear. I hear my computer. I hear, some traffic outside, so notice that. And then 2 things you smell. That's a little harder. I'm not sure that I, always can come up with that, but you can try. And then 1 thing you taste. I have a glass of water. So as you run through that, it brings you back into the moment. So these are just a couple of quick tools, and there are so many more out there, but I wanted to at least mention a couple things that can really bring you back into the moment. And then finally, let's talk about setting healthy boundaries and, embracing self-care without guilt. So we've talked about different tools, for calming emotions, calming stress, um, taking care of yourself. And so I want to invite you to think about, how can I incorporate self-care into my holiday season and not just get swept up with what everyone else expects of me? And, depending on your situation, for some of us, this is harder than for others. I know, especially people that may be mothers of small children, or, swept up in families that have a lot of expectations. It can be really hard sometimes to find a peaceful way through the holidays. But think about, how would I make time for just even small amounts of self-care, whether it be a walk or breathing or time with a vegan friend, And the other thing to reflect on is, are there certain situations now where I need to or want to speak up about my needs? Maybe you've thought about some of these traditions and you want to do something a little different. So be thinking about that as we cover a few suggestions here. So starting with self-care. What is your current self-care routine, and what would you want to implement during the holidays to help you have moments to relax or to manage stress or deal with your emotions? What are you already doing, and what maybe would you want to try to implement? So be thinking about that. And it doesn't have to be big. Sometimes it's easier just to say, I'm going to do 1 or 2 things and do it, be consistent with it, than try to promise yourself too much and then not do anything. So I've done things like, when I was first starting meditation, I started by sometimes just setting a timer for 5 minutes and just committing to that 5 minutes. Later, I lengthened it to 10 minutes. Other things that I've done, whether it be journaling or walks, sometimes I just start with what's realistic for me to at least get started. And then, often I find if it's really beneficial, I'll add to it over time. So just think about even small steps, but that you could be consistent with. And do you check in with yourself? Um, Do you look at what you're feeling and needing, as we talked about earlier, and honoring that? And when you do check in with yourself, are you kind and compassionate towards yourself? I think this is so important for us as vegans. You know, I've seen so many vegans that are so compassionate for what's happening to animals, and yet forgetting that we too are animals that do have limits and needs, and you know, our bodies will let us know when we have certain needs. So being kind to yourself too, and realizing, you know, what you are doing that's positive and giving yourself credit for that. Taking care of yourself with healthy whole plant foods, getting lots of antioxidants through those whole plant foods, fiber, all those good nutrients, getting enough sleep, getting some movement and exercise in your life. And what kind of support systems do you have in place? As vegans, we need support, and just want to invite you to think about, you know, do you have supports like this, what we're meeting right now, and other supports? Want to invite you to think about that. Um, what are the pleasurable activities that you might enjoy that are separate from, either if you're doing activism or you work, what are things you do that lets you laugh and play and just enjoy the beauty of life? Sometimes I've had to remind myself why I'm vegan, and part of it's because I love this beautiful world and, you know, animals and people too. And I just, you know, I need to remember the positive reasons for this lifestyle. So think about those things for yourself. And so, what do you think you'll implement? I'm going to invite you to create your own prescription, you know, from the things I've talked about, and maybe your own ideas as well. What are some of the things you're going to implement through the holidays? How will you recognize when you need a timeout? What can you do, or where can you go when you're feeling really overwhelmed? And who is your support person or people that you can turn to? So, and it does help to write this out. I think a lot of times we wait and leave things till we're overwhelmed already. And if you have a plan, it's going to go a lot better. It's going to be easier to implement it. And just briefly about communication. Um, you know, some of what we've talked about today involves letting people in our lives know that we want to maybe do something different. You know, it might be, you know, for a new vegan, it might be just simply letting the people in your life know that I'm vegan now and I'm not going to be eating grandma's, you know, meal that she prepares, because now I'm not eating anything that has animal products. Sometimes it's just letting people know where you're at with things. Sometimes it's you're asking them to make a change. Um, Sometimes you're saying, I'm not going to attend a certain event, but I'd like to see you at another time when maybe it doesn't involve food. So be thinking about the situations where you might be communicating a new need or a boundary, or just where you're at with things, and set an intention for how you want to approach that. Sometimes, again, we just launch on into our communication and just kind of react, but it will generally go better if we think about what it is we really want. What do we want to create? What do we want for ourselves out of the communication? What are we hoping that the other person might receive from it? And what do we want for the relationship? And for the bigger picture, our values as vegans. And how do we communicate in a way that's consistent with that? um, you know, kind of the tone of voice we might use, and just different ways that we'd approach it that might have a better result. And I think a good question to be thinking about is, sometimes as vegans, we feel caught in this either or, like, you know, either I honor my values or I connect with my loved ones. But there's always new creative solutions. It just sometimes takes a while to figure them out. And they don't always go smoothly at first because people resist change, but sometimes people learn to adapt. So how do I honor my desire to spend time with some loved ones, but at the same time also honor my commitment to my veganism? And, you know, again, there are creative solutions that people find, and you have to find what's right for you. And so what are ways that I can spend time with loved ones that actually do really fit with my values, and that feel okay to me? In thinking about communication and your intention, you know, sometimes we might unknowingly have sort of unhealthy expectations or agendas. And so it's sometimes helpful to just be aware of that. You know, sometimes there's a part of us, and I've been guilty of this, that just want to win or prove that we're right on a certain point. Or we try to push someone into change that they're maybe not ready to make, or we shame someone, try to make them feel like they're bad for what they're doing, or we try to push communication when it's just not good timing. So it's helpful just to be aware of when that's happening. We're human, sometimes that happens, but it's not usually a helpful way to communicate or to produce really a meaningful conversation, because people tend to shut down if they feel judged or shamed, or like someone's just trying to prove a point. It's harder sometimes to actually engage in a conversation where we're really truthful about what we feel and what we want, but also allow the person to have their own feelings and beliefs as well, and to have a conversation where we can share the truth of our experience and share it with I language. Like, I once felt that way too, but now that I've become vegan, this is what I've discovered. Um, so some healthier intentions are sharing our own truth, but in our own experience, and reaching some kind of mutual understanding where we understand each other better, and where we can express our needs and desires, where we can create shared agreements, especially with veganism, that we might be creating shared agreements about food and about what's on the menu for a certain meal, or how we're going to handle certain meals and events. So finding things, that we can work out together that's agreeable. Or if someone's just not willing to communicate with us, then we might have to just say to them, this is what I'm choosing to do for this event. So, and another part of healthy communication is increasing our sense of connection and safety for both people. There's going to be much more meaningful conversations if both people feel like, even if we disagree on an issue, we still have each other's back. So just holding these in mind, um, even knowing, again, I realize it's not always easy. Um, the form of communication that best lets you have that more healthy version of communication is assertive communication, sometimes also called nonviolent communication. And just keep in mind, in being assertive, it doesn't mean you're being passive. It doesn't mean you're not speaking up. You're being clear and direct about your feelings, your needs, your perspectives, but you're also doing it with a tone and body language and words that are respectful to the other person and to yourself. So it's sort of this really sweet spot of not being passive and holding things in. It's also not being aggressive and hostile. It's being direct and respectful and daring to have those tough conversations, but in a way that actually is more likely to be effective. One example of assertive communication is from this book, Messages, the communication skills book, where they suggest using what they call whole messages. I believe that, going into depth about this is beyond the scope of what we have time for today, but I do want to mention there's a lot of great communication books out there that can help us in improving how we communicate. And I think as vegans, we need to become very good communicators, because we're no longer just following the status quo, and we're trying to have people around us understand our choices, and maybe sometimes hoping to inspire them as well, to maybe someday plant seeds for change themselves. So the whole messages involve, maybe you're having a challenging conversation with a family member, like that laughed at you along with other people at an event when someone made a negative comment about veganism. And so you're having a conversation with this person to let them know that you're really hurt about it. And so I'm using that as an example for how to apply this model. So, you're having this conversation with this person and just saying, when we were at this party, you laughed along with the others when my brother said this negative comment about vegans. So you're just giving an observation about the behavior, not judging it, just describing what happened. And then you share your thoughts. And that made me feel like you weren't on my side. And then the feelings, that's the emotional part. And I was really sad and hurt. And then the need, when we're at an event together, and if someone makes a negative comment, it would really mean a lot for me, for you to support me and not join in with this, these negative comments, because it would just really make me feel like you were with me and I wasn't alone in this. I want to have you stand up for me and understand where I'm coming from with veganism. So it's just basically a way of asking for what you need and doing it in a way where the other person can really understand where you're coming from and be less likely to feel that you're attacking them. So it does take some thought to do these things. So I find that it's a work in progress for me, and I'm not always great at it. Sometimes I have to think about it and go back to a situation and do it better after I've had time to reflect. So we're all learning, but there's a lot of great books about communication, and I do mention a few of them on a resource slide at the end of this. So we'll come to that in a minute. But I just want to invite you just to imagine that you were able to apply some of whatever resonated for you in what I've shared so far. Imagine that you could, speak up in some of the situations where you really want to speak up, and you could do it in a way that led to positive communication, maybe even some positive changes, but at least you feeling good about yourself that you spoke up and that you did it in a way that was respectful to yourself and to others. Imagine that you took care of yourself during the holidays and it was relaxing and joyful instead of exhausting and overwhelming and whatever the negatives that you might be concerned about. Imagine you ate lots of delicious vegan food and enjoyed some time with maybe some vegan friends, and maybe even planted some seeds for those around you who are not vegan. Whatever your vision of a beautiful holiday, take a moment just to envision that, where it's centered around the values that matter to you. And how good that could feel. And again, I invite you to take more time with some of this, given that I'm having to go through it fairly quickly. Some of these questions are good to come back to and envision and journal about. I want to briefly mention the story of someone that I interviewed for my book, who I think was a really great example of navigating the holidays as a vegan and finding her own path, which might be different than yours or mine, but it kind of lets you be creative in discovering your own solutions. When I interviewed Shannon, she was a new vegan that she'd only been vegan for about a year. And at the time the holidays came around, she was a really new vegan, maybe just a few months. And she was definitely not sure how she was going to handle the holidays. She was newly married and she had a lot of family of origin events that she would attend with her, parents and grandparents. And there were just certain expectations that she just wasn't sure like how she was going to speak up and handle them. And she remembers her mother asking her early on, well, what about grandma's pumpkin pie? How are you going to handle that? And, what will we do at the holidays if you're vegan now? So at first it seemed like this big dramatic thing. And she was kind of a people pleaser. She, had discovered this about herself, that she really tended to want to make everyone happy. So for her, learning to speak up and say, first of all, that I'm vegan, I became vegan in her case because of the animals. And I just don't feel comfortable eating meat and animal products anymore. So that first holiday, she brought a lot of vegan side dishes, but she felt kind of disappointed because no one else changed what they made. They just made all the traditional foods, and she just felt kind of bad that they didn't try maybe to veganize a dish or whatever. But she still brought the food, and people enjoyed what she brought. And the next holiday, she provided all the food, and everybody enjoyed it. She even tried to replicate her grandmother's pumpkin pie, and it wasn't perfect, but it was still good. She mentioned when I communicated with her later on that she'd gotten to where she could perfect that pumpkin pie, and it's now like, totally awesome. So, but she really learned early on that she had to prepare and be proactive for social gatherings. She had to decide what she was going to bring. She had to communicate what she wanted and needed. She didn't push anyone, but after like a year or so, the family actually started making vegan side dishes as they discovered more how to do it, and they found that it actually tasted good. And they, learned that this wasn't just a phase she was going through. This was something that was really a serious part of her life. And in the time, she learned to be more assertive and speak up for her own needs and decide what she was willing to be part of and where she needed to kind of take some space for herself. she learned to create what Dr. Melanie Joy calls vegan allies. So even though not everybody in her life became vegan, they learned to support her veganism. And they moved in the direction towards, eating more plant-based over time, which was really cool to see. And then she found that she actually gained deeper self-esteem because she actually felt like she was honoring her values. And that also, I think, let her have deeper relationships, because even though there was some stress and tension, especially early on, she was being more authentic. So in time, she kind of worked through those tough moments and actually deepened her relationships. I think when we last communicated, several of her family members were eating much more in the plant-based direction than they had been previously. And she'd learned how to navigate the holidays in a way that worked for her. So be thinking how that applies for you. And think about, what you can take away from today. Are there certain steps that you're going to commit to taking for your own holidays moving forward, and realize that we can always be growing and learning. So I invite you to reflect on that. Here are a few helpful books on communication. These are especially geared towards vegans. I'd mentioned earlier the book Messages. That's more of a general communication book. And I also love the book Crucial Conversations, which is also a general communication book. But the ones listed here, Beyond Beliefs by Dr. Melanie Joy, Colleen Patrick Gaudreau's books, Living Among Meat Eaters by Carol Adams, and Mind If I Eat the Cheeseburger by Sherry Kolb. These 5 books are all specific to vegan communication. So I think they are really helpful. And it's helpful to be empowered on this path. This is just the book that I have coming out. And actually the book is more about the positive transformation of a vegan lifestyle, but there are chapters about handling social situations and thriving emotionally as a vegan. It is available for pre-order, The Vegan Transformation. And last of all, this is how you can contact me, my website, www.angelacrawfordphd.com. And I have a newsletter and updates about the book, and occasionally resources and classes like this one. So please do feel free to connect. And so I'm going to stop sharing, see if I can get there. Okay. So we have a few minutes, and I realize we're running near the end of the time, but I wondered if anyone is here, if you had anything specific that you wanted to talk about that relates to your own challenges with, handling the holidays. We do have a little time for Q&A if anybody wanted to share a question or a challenge or, anything. So please feel free to raise your hand or use the raise your hand icon if you wanted to share anything, or you can even type in the chat too, either way. And no pressure, but if you do, I want to give a little time. Take a moment or two to think about if there's anything you want to bring up. I know for each of us, this is different, and it depends on our family situation. But think about what led you to sign up for this event to begin with, and if there's anything, and that you might want to share about your own situation. And also, if you don't want to talk, do feel free to type in the chat. Okay. Alice, did you want to say something?
Yeah, I had a question. So I guess I was wondering if you had advice for communication with family members that don't tend to be particularly validating in general. Some of them may have validating actions, but words generally aren't. And I didn't know if you had thoughts about that.
And just out of curiosity, what would you like, if it could be good for you, what would you like to see happen?
Um, I mean, ideally, ideally there would be more understanding rather than kind of um minimization, and I guess part of the reason I came was a family member was making a comment that his cat had real needs related to what she eats and not just preferences, so um maybe a little more understanding would be would be nice.
Yeah. Yeah, I think like first of all, I go through similar things. So like even as we're talking about ways to handle these, and I have some thoughts on what you're saying there, but I just want to acknowledge that like I have sometimes family members that will say or do things that just suddenly seem very insensitive. And it's not easy. It's kind of triggering because I think it makes me personally feel sort of isolated because we want to feel part of our families and feel connected and understood. And then when they say something that goes against our very deepest, something that's very a very deep value for us, or don't seem to show understanding, it can feel really hurtful. So, I mean, I think for one, being compassionate to yourself when it triggers you, that that's understandable, and also understanding too that I think a lot of times people do this because our society is so invested in not seeing what happens to animals that we have to justify it in all kinds of ways. Um, so I think that's what is behind a lot of that. But in terms of your communication, um, one thing I really took from Dr. Melanie Joy in the book Beyond Beliefs that she wrote, which I do highly recommend, because it's about communication between vegans and meat eaters and talks about some of the dilemmas we face and how it makes us feel and how we can handle that. But one thing she really points out is when we ask people to be vegan allies for us and tell them what that looks like and what that would feel like and what you're wanting from them, it can take the pressure off that you're not trying to change them. Like I know a part of us wants to change our family. I know like I get frustrated because I'm like, I have some compassionate family members or friends that I think should really see certain things and then they don't. But I think when we say, hey, this is really important to me for this reason, and we share our reasons for why we're vegan. And I realize that, maybe you're not there with me in terms of you being willing or ready to go in that direction, but it really would mean a lot for me for you to be emotionally supportive of my decision because it's really traumatizing for me when I hear about harm to animals. I see it in a different way than I saw it before. Before, maybe I could have tuned it out too or minimized it, but now I see it in full detail. And I'm not trying to put that on you, but I do ask that you be mindful that certain comments that might seem like nothing to you are actually hurtful to me, and so you're trying to ask them to be a support to you and to see it from your perspective. I do think that sometimes doing that can help people be more open because you're asking it on your own behalf rather than saying you need to change or you're wrong for how you see this. And it sort of helps people maybe consider it more with less defensiveness. It's not always fully satisfying, but it's one approach to at least start to open the conversation where someone might hear you more without feeling that wall up so much. So I don't know whether that's helpful or not, but that's one thought that comes to mind. Um, just letting it know how it makes you feel and the support that you would like from them, and just like say, I realize you might see it differently. I once did too, but this is where I'm at now. So yeah, wishing you good luck with that.
Thank
And
you.
I do recommend her book. It has a lot of great insights. Yeah. Well, thank you so much for being here. And I think we'll wrap up for now. But for those of you that tune in later, also best wishes on your vegan holidays. So I think we'll just end there.
Thank you.
Okay. Thanks for coming. Take care. Happy holidays.
Thank you.